Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's discussion on whether or not the CV is dead. My name is Sarah Rice and I'm the editor of the HR World, which is a networking and media platform here in the UK. I'll be moderating the session today with our expert panel, who we will get to in a moment. As you can hopefully see, there's an option on the screen for you to send in your questions during the conversation, and I actively urge you to ask anything within the bounds of decency, obviously, about this topic. It's a deceptively complex issue that leads us into lots of different areas of the hiring process and company culture. So really, any question is valid and welcome. So before we hear from our panel today directly, I thought a quick update. As you can see, this is CV is Dead Part 2. It's died twice. But really one of the reasons we're having a second session is because the first time we actually ran out of time to answer everybody's questions. It's such an interesting topic that we sort of covered generally the why the CV might be on its way out. But not really getting into some of the more practical elements, which we're going to try and cover today. I mean, as we know, the dream of any hiring manager is, or recruiter, is to be able to look into the future and see how effective their talent is going to be and how they're going to perform and make an impact on the company itself. But it is more difficult than ever to make those decisions based on two pieces of paper. But what we're really trying to do as well all the time in hiring people is to remove bias. And as we know now, creating inclusive workforces is not only the right thing to do from a people point of view, but also from a wider business perspective. So how do we do this? And how do we avoid the talent pool from increasingly shrinking? And should removing bias from your hiring processes be your number one priority? This is what we're going to be exploring here today and asking, is talent analytics the answer? But we'll get into that in a second. So here to look at this very thing are our experts. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves independently. And Charlotte, if you'd like to kick us off.
Yeah, sorry, looking for the unmute button for 1 second. So hi everyone, my name is Charlotte. I am one of the founders of Equalture, which is an HR tech startup. We are based in the Netherlands, Rotterdam. And what we do is we've built a hiring software to basically help companies look beyond the resume when hiring a candidate. So we have gamification in our platform, and measuring people's soft skills, behaviors, talents, all these kinds of things to make sure that you actually get to know the person behind the resume and can use that data to make a better prediction of whether someone fits within the role in the company. So I think a bit more maybe later about that, but that's who I am. And we don't use resumes in our platform. I've never hired someone with a resume in my own company, so I'm very used to not hiring with a resume. But for most people, of course, it's still quite challenging to look for an alternative method. So very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Michaela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm Michaela, also based in the Netherlands, a little bit further north in Amsterdam. I work for a business called Unleashed, and we work to consult, to execute and deliver on kind of all aspects of people experience. So like from the moment that somebody learns about your business via like employer branding, the moment they join all the way through to exit, really helping those businesses, typically kind of high growth, high potential startups and scale ups, to shape a high performance culture and really supporting them to scale both kind of successfully and sustainably. And sustainable, you know, that sustainable hiring and sustainable growth thing, something that's really important and that we talk to businesses a lot about. So yeah, I'm sort of fairly familiar with you know, talking to founders a lot about this kind of topic around how we kind of create more inclusive practices across all of those kind of people experience touch points. But I think really starting it off in the kind of hiring space is so important. So excited to discuss.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Alan, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. So my name's Alan Furley. I run a recruitment business called ISL Recruitment. We work with technology startups and scale-ups. I'm based not too far away from Sarah in Bristol in the UK. And a lot of the work we do is helping those founders and the other people within the business to find the great talent. I think, as Michaela mentioned, then there's a lot of things that a startup needs to scale and to grow. There's the cash, there's the processes, but definitely the people is a massive part of their success and failure. And I've worked in recruitment for coming up for 20 years now, and I guess one of the reasons this topic is one that I hopefully can contribute on, but also I want to learn from, is because we're still using the same two bits of A4 we were 20 years ago, whereas a lot of the world has moved on. Then perhaps there's an opportunity to see the world of talent attraction and retention catch up a little bit as well.
Fantastic. Thank you all. I was just reflecting, so you might be able to see I'm sort of in an office at the moment, and the last time Charlotte and Alan and I caught up on this issue was we were deep in lockdown in March, and things were still pretty uncertain out there in terms of, hiring decisions and what people were going to be doing to bring people into their organizations. And now, as things are moving and loosening up, it definitely feels like this is the right time to have this specific conversation. I thought it'd be good to maybe just sort of look at some of the issues that we did cover, just to touch on some of those sort of fundamental points about really why the CV is kind of on its way out, I guess, and just like what some of the pitfalls are, just to give us context of sort of just looking at experience and education in this way, which does feel quite two-dimensional now. And Michaela, we were talking earlier about the fact that people are looking to scale quite quickly at the moment. So what do you think the pitfalls are, really, sort of just looking at a CV in that context?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of twofold. I think that there's the facts about what we know about how to effectively test candidates. And this isn't stuff that we've come up with, right? This is like, there are many super interesting studies, that people have done testing those kinds of, the effectiveness of different kind of recruitment processes. And typically those studies really find that like testing for kind of years of experience and things like this are just not an effective way, to test a candidate, right? So like screening candidates based on years of experience, it just isn't accurate. And, by, the opposite side of that, actually like testing for more kind of cognitive ability and in structured interviews with work sample and like testing those kind of core skills, moving it to more about skills as opposed to just like education and experience is a much better way to test candidates. But then there's also the kind of human side, right? Which is like judging somebody by what school or university they went to is just inviting you to give into your own kind of unconscious and conscious bias. So like the reality is that whatever university somebody went to, it gives you little to no insight into, whether somebody can actually do the job you're advertising to. And I think that it's the reason we have such little representation of demographic identity within the workplace, right? Because when we give into this kind of halo effect bias, for instance, of converging towards who we believe are kind of like-minded people to us, who have similar kind of experience. We favor certain universities and schools over others because we think that they're maybe more prestigious, maybe without even questioning the kind of barriers even that exist within them when it comes to gender or social class or economic status or ethnic identity. So like when we lean into these kinds of biases, this kind of halo effect bias, and note education over the actual skill somebody needs to do a job that you're hiring for, which we can get so much better insight into whether they actually have the skills to do this job. But otherwise, we're perpetuating this bias, this circle of bias. And when we focus on the experience of education, we fuel this kind of system of oppression for marginalized groups. And also we're not getting necessarily the best person for the job, yeah.
I'm sold. I mean, when you put it like that, it kind of sounds crazy that we ever judged anything on a CV. I mean, Charlotte, you know, your thoughts on that would be brilliant.
Well, I think maybe a good story to share, because it happened to us quite recently, and for me was again a huge reminder of how dangerous resumes are. So we of course use our own platform to hire, so we don't really work with resumes, but we do work with LinkedIn information. So that's you still see someone's work experience, education, etc. But we have the luxury of also having insights and skills and personality, but we do see experience and education. And we had a junior sales position open, and someone applied for the position, Philip. He had like everything but the experience that you would be hoping for the position, like only very corporate experience, whereas we are a very small, chaotic startup. Everything but sales, like a lot of finance positions, for example. So if you would look at his resume, then he would not have been a fit at all, and probably he would have been filtered out right away. But he actually played the games on our platform, and he scored so well that I was saying to Fleur, my co-founder, like, this is the perfect example of a person that we should invite for a job interview. Like, this is what our platform should be about. Mm-hmm. And even though I am the founder of a company that is fighting this issue, I also have those biases somewhere in my mind, like, that work experience, those kinds of companies, I hope that this will be a fit. And he did perfectly well on his interview. And then we had a case in the second interview, and we were really blown away, and we actually hired him. So he's starting in 2 weeks now, I think. And there was a moment again in which I was saying to my co-founder, like, whoa, imagine that we would not have had the luxury to look beyond that resume, then someone like Philip should never made it to our company. Well, I think he's the perfect added value for a team. So yeah, it again made me realize how dangerous it is to just draw a conclusion based on what you can see on that piece of paper.
Well, I guess the two-way connection of that as well is for the employee coming into the business to feel that connection, to feel that it's been a two-way process, that, you know, they're involved in their own hiring as well, because it's it's an actual fit.
Yep.
I mean, Alan, as a sort of more traditional kind of recruitment processes that you will be seeing on a day-to-day basis, one of the things that, you're just hearing about what Charlotte's talking about is, the impact on the talent pool almost, in terms of what people are missing out on because of that, but what that actually does to how people are even applying for jobs in the first place.
Yeah, I think, Charlotte's story is a great one, and not as common as we might like, but thankfully there's other stories like that. Where I spoke to a founder last month who had hired someone who, when a lot of us might have been going to university, was homeless, and had then since got an apprenticeship, and you were simply hiring on a 2-1 a red brick would have failed. But actually this person had done a brilliant job for the first 6 months, and it was great to hear a story like that. It did make me think, well, how many other people would be excluded from a process where I've done it myself. As you mentioned, it's really easy to go to the obvious. Right, I'm hiring for a marketing manager. Therefore, I need, this degree. I ideally want someone who's worked with these logos, and it's a really easy thing to write down on paper and give you the confidence you're going to hire the right people. But I mentioned that it doesn't actually track through to the data and the evidence as to what makes the best hire, what's the best predictive indicator of performance. And it can be other things where people will be really reluctant to provide roles, and I guess I've got the ability sometimes to help give them confidence that they are a match based on what they're say versus what's on the job description. They can sometimes think there's not so much link, but often people will see an advert and will discount themselves because of barriers that are put in their way. They don't really track through to where their potential is, and in reality what the manager is really looking for and would really value in person the next one.
Yeah, brilliant. But it sounds just a little jittery, so maybe talk a little slower for me, my old lady ears.
I wanted to say, like, is it my ears or is this the same phone for? Okay.
Hearing aid up. I mean, but that's it, isn't it? Because actually you sort of, here we are sort of talking about potential really, aren't we? The potential for somebody when they come into that organisation, the potential that they bring is not based on the CV that they have produced. It is actually what is actually happening in the future for that person within that organisation. I mean, this seems like a good place to start, I guess. You know, I feel like that's a really good summary of kind of some of the issues that we've been looking at in the last discussion. And I think to move it on, we've been talking in, when we're promoting this webinar about talent analytics. And I'm very conscious, especially sitting at the news desk in the HR world, I get, press releases through about what the latest buzzword, the latest hiring cool thing, and I usually have to go and Google it. But I think it's a really important conversation to have about actually, defining what we mean when we talk about talent analytics and compared to what we might see as other analytics, such as the CV or such as somebody's experience and references. And it feels to me, Charlotte, that potentially this is a good place for you to kick off, given that your business is actually based on this specific kind of philosophy. But I mean, obviously, there'll be a mixture of people out there in terms of where they're coming from and different points of sort of understanding. So if you can kind of give us your understanding of it, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, I think talent analytics is definitely a new buzzword. I think relatively new still. You don't hear it that often, but I think it's going to be some sort of the new people analytics, but then for a hiring setting. But maybe that's the best comparison then, because I think that people analytics is something that people use for a longer period of time already, which is all about collecting every possible piece of information that you have about the employees in your organization to predict their lifetime, whether they're happy or not. And that ranges from information that you have from the hiring process to surveys that you send out to your team, peer reviews, these kinds of things. So all the different kinds of information that you can collect in order to say something about whether someone's happy and is doing the job right, basically. And I think talent analytics is basically the same, but then for hiring setting. So what is the possible information that you could find about someone that could help you in evaluating whether this person could be the right fit for your job, apart from a resume? So a resume, of course, also provides data points that you can use. I mean, there are a lot of matching tools that use map work experience and stuff like that, but I think talent analytics has the potential to look a bit further than only those kinds of things. So data points from assessments, I think that's most common for people around us, but also things like in the last webinar we had a guest speaker from Forward Partners, a VC from London, and he told that one of his portfolio companies, for instance, is not applying with a resume, but lets people answer all kinds of situational questions. And then behind the scenes, people rate the answers to questions. So that's just a free method, doesn't cost you any money. But by rating people, then you can also collect all kinds of information about someone. So it's not necessarily only about, hey, I need to use technology in order to find someone's behavior on the internet or someone's moves on social media, but it's just, what information can I bring to the table that can help me with that decision? So that's also, for instance, scorecards and interviews. That's just as much as talent analytics as some sort of super modern AI assessment. It's just about different information than only a resume, in my opinion, by the way, because I know that there are a lot of different views on this topic.
Yeah. And I mean, Michaela, you have worked around, in terms of its application, I guess, on the sort of the other side to Charlotte, in terms of, working with clients who are scaling and sort of using these methods strategically, I guess, in terms of you're going in to really help businesses successfully scale quickly and in the right way. I mean, how do you understand talent analytics to be working in real time, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, very much similarly to how Charlotte explained, I think it really, really varies depending on the business. But I think that, like, certainly something that we talk to a lot of businesses about is, through inclusion and diversity, how do we create more of an inclusive hiring process? How do we hire much more objectively and try to remove as much bias as possible? And ultimately so that we can test the right things, you know, like if we're able to have a much clearer understanding of what we're testing for, you know, the non-negotiable skills, behaviors, attitudes, the things that may be more nice to have, things that we're maybe as a business more happy to teach. It just allows us to test more effectively for the stuff that matters. And again, like, you know, as we were talking about the CV, you know, not become biased towards like things that just don't really contribute to whether somebody can actually do the job. So yeah, so like maybe that is, you know, gamification of certain kinds of skills and behaviors. Maybe that's kind of testing for kind of general cognitive ability. You know, general cognitive ability obviously is a much higher indicator of whether somebody will actually be able to do the job. And I think that actually, you know, if we look at, you know, specific mental ability, for instance, things like, you know, somebody's ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think outside the box, you know, understand really complex ideas, learn quickly from experience, things like this. You know, those are really the skills that help people to be successful within a startup environment. So like these are skills that often founders and leadership teams are thinking, yes, these are the things I really want within somebody. So, you know, being able to measure more objectively some of the things that actually matter, you know, also using really kind of skills-based assessment. So again, like being very, very clear on the specific skills and behaviors we need within somebody, you know, and understanding how maybe we can test for those. You know, work sample, you know, scoring via work sample tasks also. You know, I think one of the best predictors of success is really to test somebody doing the work that's expected of them. And, you know, and here potential can be met that kind of potential, even because I know that Alan was mentioning about somebody's potential also to kind of grow, like thinking about measuring by sort of methodology, measuring somebody by, you know, their approach to a challenge, how they design, how they plan, you know, not only just the output itself, whereas of course, you know, testing in work samples, you do get a lot of output, which is also super brilliant. But you know, testing for somebody's approach is also equally as important. So if we think about, you know, for instance, like if you're hiring, I don't know, like a talent manager, for instance, you know, thinking about how we assess their output, but also how we assess their approach. You know, how do they structure a candidate, you know, communication? How do they design a recruitment process for a particularly tricky role? You know, what do they believe they need to do to really be able to do this job well? We start to, you know, I think these are the easiest ways, I think, for companies to start to use more kind of talent analytics and start to kind of remove that subjectivity from their kind of interview process to really test some of the things that actually matter, like skill and potential and, you know, behavior and attribute over you know, where somebody used to work and the university they went to and stuff like this.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe good to, sorry, to add to that, I think that because talent analytics, again, of course, it sounds really like buzzwords, AI, tricky data, but it's so much more easy than that. And I think without us being aware of it, we, as a company, already use a lot of alternative insights on candidates. But the problem is that we tend to do it much further in the process also. I mean, like situational questions. Indeed, if I'm going to hire a talent manager and this person needs to set up the whole talent department, like it makes sense that in an interview you will ask, like, how will you do that? Or you let someone prepare a case to do so. But the tricky thing is, of course, then that you only do that for the people that you already screened based on their resume. So I think we already make use of a lot of components of data analytics, talent analytics, but we don't really get when we need to do it in order to use it the right way. I think that's the bigger challenge behind this topic.
Yeah, so I suppose what we're essentially saying off the back of that, Charlotte, is actually just like, how do we incorporate these talent analytics earlier in our process? So, you know, as you said, like, it's brilliant that all these companies are, you know, sending great, like, you know, specific tasks to their candidates, and they're using situational questions and things like this. But actually, like, it doesn't really matter so much if they've already judged somebody based on, like, you know, what university they went to, or where they grew up, or what school they went to, for instance. Like, how do we include that, you know, increase objectivity and include those kinds of talent analytics earlier on in the process, so that we're really running a much more unbiased hiring process within our company?
I mean, that's a really good question, isn't it? Because one of the things that, from the research that I've done, is to see that there are different, you know, businesses are on very different journeys anyway, aren't they, in terms of where they're at with their hiring philosophies and their hiring approaches. But there's also potentially different levels at which analytics would be more successful, or it's different, you know. So, for example, when you're hiring more junior people on a you know, fairly more straightforward basis, than hiring somebody quite senior. And I think, Alan, you know, in terms of where you would see that in a normal recruitment process, you know, how would that usually sort of work, and where would you see the differences in terms of junior hiring compared to more senior roles?
I think that it can definitely be thinking about the different stages. So I think people going to market, approaching it with on data and education experience, can really open up the pool of candidates. Got a tricky role, senior role, want to massively improve the talent pool. I think going to market with a different hiring approach can really. I think then there's some roles. If you went out now to list for customer service manager, you might find you get 300 applications. So yeah, I definitely think you can then use it to really optimize filtering, and to go from, I've 300, how on earth am I going to look at someone who communicates strongly and really cares a service? TV probably doesn't tell you that, whereas maybe a one or size or a gamified tool would do. And then I think, as Charlotte talked about, scorecard, that manual process rather than tech process, that gives you that consistent, objective data. So some companies may choose to use it to attract more people, filter, maybe to better interview and assess. Some companies may pick one of those areas, others may use all three. And I think it's useful to think about not just that hiring process, but how you can use this data to help or onboard them to maximize the productivity after you've made that hire, maximize the
Because I think that was one of the questions in the last session that we did, which was really about, you know, from a candidate perspective as well, is, you know, everyone was talking about, so soft skills is another one of these buzzwords, isn't it? So soft skills. Like, what is a soft skill? And actually, you know, how am I meant to come in and make you a cake? I don't know. It's like, you know, what's the, in terms of that more traditional methodology, what, you know, how do you demonstrate that soft skill? And I guess that's what you guys are saying, is that those are the things that are going to come through if we can just analyze that a little bit. Because, you know, from the person who's applying for the job, you know, they're going into a situation which is actually, if they're being, you know, tested in different ways, it's quite overwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Because of course, you know, as much as probably, like, we all know people do, of course, embellish their CVs, you know, like, people don't want to feel as though they've been unfairly judged for a job, right? Like, they want to have a fair chance to, you know, get the position that they're applying for. And I think, you know, perhaps there's a question around sort of education around, like, you know, hiring ethos and the philosophy around, you know, incorporating these kinds of, you know, ways of testing candidates. They really understand, you know, why actually we're doing this differently. But ultimately, I think that people realize that, of course, that it is to create more objectivity so that we can hire the best person for the job in a much more, you know, inclusive and unbiased way. I think that's surely a good thing for everybody.
And I guess with that in mind, it's a really good point, is that, you know, how do you know as a company, if you're a founder or you're an HR manager, how do you assess how best to integrate this kind of technology and this kind of hiring philosophy into your organization? I mean, Charlotte, you must talk to a wide range of businesses looking at so many different types of hiring. You know, what's the sort of strategic piece and the analytical piece before you would put something like this in place?
Well, I think I think that you can only apply an alternative hiring method or a talent analytics if you. It's not necessarily about the tooling you're going to use. It's about what do you actually want from someone in a specific position. So let's take as an example, for instance, I think that sales is a perfect example. Like if people have a sales position open companies, for instance, in B2B SaaS, I know that it's really a thing that if you open up a sales position, you want people to have sales experience in a B2B SaaS company. I think then the important question to ask yourself is, why is it that I'm seeking for that experience? Or in other words, what do I expect from someone with this specific experience to bring to the table? And then usually the conversation is starting like, I want someone with these personalities. I want someone to be resilient. I want someone to be able to deal with complex structures, as a lot of SaaS tooling connects with different tooling, etc. I want someone to handle the tough situations like example A that we experienced recently. And then you come to the point that you are actually creating that list already for yourself. Like, hey, okay, this is what I assume to get if I'm looking to that experience. And then it's just about finding a way to measure it, right? And that can be through tooling. You can use an assessment for that, but you could also say, in my job application, I'm already going to ask situational questions. Like, imagine that this would happen in this position when you're working in this company. What would you do? So I think that's the most important part. Start with, if I am biased by looking at that resume, what would my biased mind then hope to get out of that work experience? Mm-hmm. And then find ways to measure it. And I think that tooling then, whether it's a tool or it's just asking the right questions, that doesn't really matter. It doesn't necessarily have to be technology, but it should be about knowing what to look for. Because otherwise you're going to buy all those different fancy tools that can measure someone's behavior online and someone's potential and all these kinds of things. But if you have all those data points, you have no clue what to do with it, then it's just going to overwhelm you and not add any value to your process, of course.
And if it's not focused also, I think just going off what you're saying, Charlotte, because I think it's such an important point. Like, we have to, of course, if we're taking one particular role, for instance, we have to really first understand, what do we need to be successful in this role? What does great high performance in this role look like across kind of somebody's skills, knowledge, behaviors, action? Like, what do they do? Also thinking about the team also, and I suppose this, we often work with founders a lot to kind of skills map within a team, really understanding, what skills and experience and behaviors allow somebody in this role to be super successful. Where have our successes been in the future and what kind of skills have underpinned them? What skills do we also feel like we're missing from this team? Are we quite a high risk team? Do we maybe need somebody to level us out a little bit? And then I know Alan mentioned earlier a little bit about that kind of potential piece also. We talk to founders a lot about really thinking about the trajectory of a role. If you're hiring for an immediate need or to kind of fill an immediate skills gap and not really thinking about how this role will develop over the next year or two, and how we expect this role to develop within our company, you're not hiring in a sustainable or scalable way. So really making sure that we're also thinking about that potential piece, hiring somebody who's going to be able to grow alongside the company, as well also for a candidate, right? Like, that growth opportunity is going to be very attractive for your talent pool, right? So and then I think once you've been able to kind of focus your energy on what we really need within this role or within this team, and how we know this kind of role is potentially going to progress, then I think it maybe becomes a little bit easier to think down, break that down around like, okay, well, if these are the skills and the attributes and the behaviors that we need, how do we then test objectively for this? So kind of breaking it down a little bit, like step by step.
It feels, I mean, it's just as listening to you talk, I mean, that sounds like sort of like a utopian world of, I mean, that's just me, but I've worked with all sorts of different companies, and I guess it's like some companies are going to be much more on that journey than others, I guess, in the sense of where they're at, even understanding what those questions might mean for them as an organization. I mean, Alan, Alan, I mean, your sound is still slightly not working, but but I mean, in terms of, I mean, how different is that to what you do at the moment, and kind of when you're going into an organization and sort of challenging at that level? Are you finding that some people are on, they're already on the talent analytics journey, and some are just completely like, give me the paper?
Yeah, I think there's always a practical where the world of startups in particular that I operate in, that everything needs to happen today rather than wait to tomorrow. So I think whether it's either promoting the role with represented groups or putting in a process different and therefore requires some effort set up, like some analytics, like Charlotte mentioned, it doesn't need to be an all-encompassing tool, but there's no doubt it involves a bit of time and effort to, before you get the answers, to think about what the question you're asking actually is, to be able to measure the right answers. So I think the challenge is often that, it sounds great, but can we do it on the next one? And I think that's one where partly it's around thinking the value in the right hire versus a hire, the value in finding someone that is more likely to retain and to maximize their productivity and their potential is so much more obvious in hindsight versus just a quick fill that might be hired for the wrong reasons. And I often see the bad decisions 3 months down the line. A candidate comes to me because they were hired based on the fact they went to Oxford and worked for a nice big logo, and actually there wasn't the match on soft skills or value, or there wasn't the objective measurement from both sides as to what made a good hire and what made a good employee. And it is difficult to say, if you don't do this, then this might be the pain, until you've actually lived it and felt it. But I think for a lot of us, we've seen the challenges in hiring based on two sides of A4 and matching them to another two sides of A4 in a job spec. So it's then hopefully the more stories we can tell, the more evidence there is. The data and the research is already there around what makes a high likelihood of predicting performance, but it's just then really reviewing that process to make sure that backs up what the data often tells us.
Because that's it, right? Because in terms of what this actually means for an organization, because we talk about hiring, but this is actually about retention, isn't it? This is really about keeping you. This huge amount of effort and money goes into hiring just one individual for them to leave. And I think the statistics on anyone leaving within the first 45 days of a job are still atrocious. I mean, it's really, upwards of sort of 30%. I mean, when we've got that kind of evidence already, when we're looking at, that's based on a traditional form of hiring, where would you go in, Michaela, kind of looking at sort of the business case, if you like, for how that retention piece really can impact the bottom line and kind of help grow companies?
I mean, I think we all know, like, it's so much more expensive to replace somebody who joins your business and then leaves than to hire somebody first off. So I think, yes, of course, like there's that piece, like it is just more expensive for you as a business, but also like creating more diversity also has also been proved to positively drive revenue growth. So I think it was McKinsey who did like a really great study. I think it was called Delivering Through Diversity, that really showed that gender diversity in management positions specifically actually increased effectiveness and profitability even more than previously thought. So I feel like there's if you look and if you really, really want to look, there are so many reasons why this has to be high on our agenda. And when we really have to, because ultimately what we're talking about here is exactly that. It's reducing bias, it's hiring more objectively and figuring out the best way for us to do that. And yeah, I think like we can just make better hires who are more suited for the role, for the team. Ultimately, like if we just hire teams in our own image, we'll have tons of blind spots, and we won't be creating an environment where we can create diversity. Like if we're hiring everybody in the same image, and I think obviously it's sometimes difficult, and I understand Alan's point about trying to get bigger businesses to take this approach, but also in startups where this hire was needed yesterday and stuff like this. I think also it from something that we see a lot also within startups is the kind of culture question around still a lot of businesses hiring for culture fit. And what culture fit means is essentially that we're hiring somebody who just fits in, is quite similar to everybody else, whereas maybe actually reframing that in what is this person going to add to our culture, how do we test for that in an objective way, and also is this person aligned with our values? If our values are the things that underpin the successes that we have as a business, how do we objectively hire for that, for somebody who's really aligned with our values and is really adding to our culture? So it's not, I think from a startup and scale up perspective, it's not even just a kind of skills question. It's also if we understand what kind of behaviors we need for somebody to really be living our values and contributing positively to our culture, how do we test for that in an objective way?
Yeah, and I guess it's an ongoing process as well, isn't it? I mean, we're not sort of just talking at the point of hiring, but I mean, I guess in the sense of, and to take your point just now, in terms of that scaling piece and kind of looking at what might be happening in the market now, people looking to grow, to get people through the door, to help, produce and be active members of their teams. I mean, how quickly, and this is maybe just my sort of ignorance, but it's that how quickly can you go around introducing these kind of analytics into an organization and see the results? Because I guess like you're saying is like Alan was saying, is people just want to kind of get people through the door. So the next time when we're a bit more sorted, things are a bit more stable, the next time we'll use this because it's just a bit too much of a hurdle. I mean, what are the main barriers to uptake?
I think time, it's like, and I suppose it is one of those things of kind of needing to slow down to speed up. Because actually, if we're testing candidates properly and using more of a structured approach that's kind of tried and true in terms of objectively hiring, it shouldn't actually be a longer process. In actual fact, I think that we know that for instance, unstructured interviews only really explain around 10 or 12% of job performance. Reference checks, for instance, I think that's around 5 to 7% of job performance, right? So we're all doing these things, and we're not actually learning about who can actually do the job. And so actually scaling it back, understanding the kinds of and I suppose about stopping and researching and figuring out what are the best ways. For instance, thinking again about work kind of sample tests, testing that kind of real life experience. Actually, I think that's closer to 30% of job performance, understanding job performance. So actually, we can gain much more insight into whether somebody can do the job. And that kind of paired with kind of testing for general cognitive ability and a structured skills interview, which are similarly, really up there in terms of testing job performance. These are the things that we need to be including in our interview process. And it's not, if we get rid of all the stuff that we know isn't actually going to, give us much insight. Yes, it's about changing the process to accommodate those things. But I think that still, you know, if we do that well, we're still going to be able to hire much quicker and much more effectively than perhaps our current process. And it's, of course, you know, not necessarily about, you know, as Charlotte said, you know, getting all of these left, right and center tech tools to help process. You can do that and that's super effective. But if you want to make some changes right now, it's much more about, you know, breaking down the content of the job that you're hiring for, you know, 4 points, and then linking each one of those sections to a test that you know, a sample test which you can send somebody that doesn't go live. It's just to see their approach, you know, their methodology, not even necessarily the output to how they would do that task. And that's a really, really quick change that you
quick
can
way of
make.
That, yeah. I mean, Charlotte, just to that point, I mean, where are you finding the sort of the pinch points at the moment when you're talking to people about some of the challenges that they might be facing in implementing or putting these things in place?
I think 3 things. Hopefully I remember all 3 of them. First one is what Michaela was just talking about. Like it's that breaking down the components of a job, like that's still very new to people. People are like, you would be surprised by the amount of people that are just grabbing a template from the internet and that's the job description and then it goes live and we don't really think about what does it actually take to be on that job. So I think that being able to really look further than the standard job description is definitely an issue. I think second of all is already mentioned as well, time. Like when we are going to hire someone, it's always too late. Like the moment you realize I need to hire someone, then this person should have started yesterday already. So when is then the time to make such a change in your hiring process? I think you should always make the time, but in real life, it doesn't always work that way. Oh, it were 4 points actually. So the third one then is I think that hiring managers need a lot of education here. I think that hiring managers have a huge impact on the hiring process. It's often the hiring manager for companies that we work for instance, the most resistance comes from hiring managers in general. They just don't want to let go of new methods because as a HR professional, talent professional, you are diving into this topic every day. So you have a very clear understanding of what you can do about resume hiring. But as a hiring manager, you lack that experience and thus you would like to stick to the current method. So I think that's an issue, how to make sure that the hiring manager is on board. And lastly, I think Sabina mentioned it just in the chat, and I think that's also a very nice one. If we would like to let go of resume-based hiring, then we also shouldn't communicate resume-based requirements in a job description, because then you just keep feeding this mechanism, right? So it also starts with making sure that you don't communicate your job description in a resume-based kind of format in order to achieve this. So as you hear, 4 points eventually. I think there are quite a lot of challenges here to make it work. And I do fully understand that a lot of organizations therefore are thinking about this concept, but still can't really get their heads around how to really get this off the ground.
Yeah. I mean, just so brilliant. So just sort of picking up on some of the questions sort of in the chat. I mean, is there an effect, as Yolanda has really made a really great point here, is there a gender effect here in terms of, you know, some of the, you know, what she's saying here is women apply for jobs and thinking they can manage, whereas men are just sort of trusting how to do the jobs. I mean, that seems to be very much at the heart of what these kinds of solutions can really sort of pick apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think even actually what Charlotte was saying just then, I think there's a really horrific statistic about like sometimes a man will look at the like job requirements of the things that they need to have done in their career, and if they match, you know, like 20% of them, then they'll apply. And for women, it's like if they match 80% of them, but there's like 20% that's missing, they maybe won't. So like for sure, I think we really need to, again, like focus on the stuff that matters and move away from like that kind of like CV requirement, CV, I suppose, yeah, like CV requirement, because also like I don't what am I trying to say exactly?
Yeah, which was just, yeah, around the gender piece as well, in terms of what's.
Yeah, and also because the thing is, and I suppose it kind of also goes back to the thing we were talking about around potential, right? Because jobs change and develop over time.
Yeah.
So looking for somebody who has potential and is able to be agile and change their approach and ride the waves is super important, because ultimately you may have done exactly this job before and that may be listed multiple times on your CV, but no one joins a new role and does exactly the same thing as in their previous position. And so the potential that's also that we want to test for is, how does somebody use and tailor their experience and their learning to a new role and a new business? You know, there's no copying and pasting of work and process and structure allowed, you know.
Yeah.
And so being so specific about having done XYZ on your job description, of course, you know, you're talking to specific genders or specific minorities maybe, but also it's not effective because, yeah, as I said, no one joins and does exactly the same thing. It's about testing for that potential, testing for how somebody's able to use their experience and tailor it to a new business and a new role.
And I guess that's a really good point as well, is, you know, one of the other points here from Kran is that, you know, does it apply, you know, in all sectors? Is that, you know, can you use this kind of technology and this sort of insight in all sectors? And that kind of, I think, marries up a little bit with how much human interaction I think we're talking about here to, you know, just kind of moderate all of those, you know, because essentially bias is, you know, the tech can still be fairly biased in the way that it's applied, I guess, and so maybe in some sectors, you know, I'm just thinking about maybe engineering or, you know, even tech to a certain degree, is, you know, is that, are you already dealing with a kind of set of, you know, parameters that makes the tech will still actually not work properly, or the analytics? I guess that's the point, isn't it?
Well, I think that it can work in every sector, apart from the fact that for some jobs you need to have, like, if you become an accountant, then of course it makes sense that you look at education in some sort of way.
But based on well, you can,
But I think it definitely works in all sectors, but I think it also depends on the more traditional the sector is, the more difficult this probably will be. And yeah, let's be honest, then the more innovative sectors will go first. And then, I think that's what happens with everything. But I think that it can definitely work, and for all sectors. And that's simply because of the fact that there is a lot of bias in all those alternative methods that we're using. Definitely not as much as there is in a resume. So it's not the perfect alternative. I think it's just a way better alternative.
All sectors, and I think like all seniority levels as well. I think we kind of touched upon this a minute ago, but you know, especially I feel like in you know, within the kinds of businesses that we work with on Unleashed, you know, startups and scale-ups, each hire of course has a disproportionate ability to affect your business and your culture, both positively and negatively. So I think that becomes even more true the more senior somebody becomes. So you know, the stakes are literally higher, you know. So yes, I think like it becomes even more important to test senior candidates against the things that really matter, and those things are not things that we can necessarily find on CVs.
Because I guess that comes back, I mean, it's to Philip's point here, that comes back into actually, you know, you might start off with a very clear set of values from the senior team. And Alan, you know, I know that you've done a lot of work on this previously, is, you know, you start a business, you have a very clear set of values, everybody, because they have direct access to you, has a very clear idea about what those values are. But then as you grow, how do you communicate those values, and then also how do you hire based on those values? And you know, is it that talent analytics should be part of that process all the way through? I mean, it's a kind of interesting thought that you would be on that journey continuously.
Yeah, I definitely think it's got to be, I think, a challenge sometimes what sector, particularly if you're a startup, you might not have the data there to be able to know exactly, you know, I think Michaela's mentioned a couple of times, you've got to measure what matters. Sometimes it's really difficult to understand what does matter. Or if you're hiring your first marketing manager, or, you know, the heavy hitting VP of sales, you don't have the data there to be able to know what you're looking for. So I think Charlotte mentioned what you definitely shouldn't do is take the job spec from your last company or Google VP of sales and adopt that as good spec. You know, I think you've got to, when I'm talking to founders about their specs, I'll talk about the purpose of the role, the outcomes of the role, and then the capabilities. Whereas I think a lot of people will start with the capabilities before they actually think about what the impact is of that hire. It's very much an ongoing process. So, you know, if we're sort of saying that talent analytics is the way forward, maybe that's the case, but it's never going to guarantee the perfect hire. It's never going to de-risk that hire entirely. So I think it's got to be an ongoing process. You've got to, as you grow, you'll get more data on your current workforce, and whether it's either the values, the soft skills, or the technical skills, you'll become, you know, you'll have more evidence about what good looks like and be able to bring that back into your hiring process, making sure that you're not assuming that one person did a good job in this area, therefore that's what I need for the future. I think, like Michaela said, whether it's either critical thinking or cognitive flexibility, there are some things that should underpin all your hires to make sure that, particularly in the startup world, but, you know, in the world as a whole, who knows what 2 years' time will look like for a business, particularly one that's still trying to work out where its product market fit is or is scaling into new territories. So I think underpinning it all has got to be values, but also the skills that, or the aptitude that helps people to learn and develop. A lot of the startups I work with talk about wanting people who will grow with them and wanting people who have that humility and that ability and aptitude to learn. But I think the danger in going back to the CV is that it doesn't really bring any of those to the surface. And, you know, so it may be a great hire for the next 3 months, but that's not really.
I think I might. Oh, sorry. Did you go again?
I love what he was saying, though, because again, like, so important. And it's actually, you know, we were saying a minute ago that, like, really breaking it down, and I think starting with that role purpose that Alan was talking about is so important. Like, you know, defining the personal mission of the role first and foremost. You know, if we had to sum it up, and then thinking about the expected impact. You know, how will we measure the impact of this role? You know, what impact do we think that this person's going to have on the business? Because I think then, of course, especially if it's a first senior hire within a business, understanding the kind of DNA first off, and then thinking more about the kind of skills and attitude that, you know, underpins that is a good way to start to do that, especially for a senior hire, as Alan was saying, who's back. Hi, Alan.
Yeah, and I think especially because I think that's the ironic part here, that many people always say, like, maybe this works for junior position, but the more senior to get, the more difficult it becomes to let go of the resume. Like Michaela said, the more important it actually is to make sure that you look behind that resume, because the impact is so enormous if a senior person turns out not to be the person for your team, because probably this person is going to manage other team, needs to show leadership skill. It's really demotivating for people if someone leaves then after 2 months because he fits the job template, but not necessarily what it actually takes to be on the role. So I think that's something that we should really get into our minds more. Like this, it's not that this is now working for senior positions, this is maybe even more important for senior positions.
Yeah. Definitely.
Fantastic. So, I mean, I think we're coming to the end of our session. I'd like to thank you all for all your fantastic points. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add at this stage in terms of, you know, I'm sure everyone can get in touch with you on LinkedIn, but yeah, any sort of key takeaways that you would all like to kind of end on?
Who wants to start?
So much pressure.
I know exactly, put you all on the spot. Charlotte, you can start. There we go.
Yeah, my advice would then really be indeed like unpack what it is that you are searching for that person, and as soon as you have that super clear, and not like I need someone in the sales position, so I look at the sales skills online, but I look at the skills that I've seen as marked as important in my team, and personality traits. That's where it starts, and from there go look for what tools or techniques you can find to help you out, but don't start with alternative methods first. First, take a look at your needs. And I know that time is always a lacking thing, but eventually it's going to save you a lot of time.
Fabulous. Alan, do you like to?
Yeah, so I think it's my advice would probably be don't be too assumptive around what you're looking for and what success looks like. So I mentioned, hopefully it came across around saying, think about the purpose, think about the outcomes, think about the capabilities. I think Charlotte touched on earlier on, rather than saying I need someone with this SaaS experience, ask yourself why. And I think if you can probably throw 3 or 4 whys at your first assumption as to the capability you're looking for, you'll come out with a much more inclusive list of capabilities, and one that will help you attract broader talent. And then bringing it back to the subject of today will then hopefully help you measure what matters in that respect. I think that the game of time and de-risk, and I think that you can definitely de-risk by doing that. I don't think you should assume it's going to take you more time. It doesn't need to be a long and laboured process, but that time at the beginning can definitely be a time saver for the rest of the process, I believe. So have confidence and experiment, and then share with us how you've got on.
Brilliant. And Michaela, to round us off.
Yeah. I think and just to sum up what the other two have said, also, I think just really, for your own business, for your own inclusion and diversity within your team, prioritize objective, unbiased hiring, break down. It's not about making it more complicated. It's not about making it a longer process, but breaking down the role, as Alan said, understanding that purpose, the impact, and then thinking about the skills and experience and behaviors that are really necessary for somebody to be successful in a role, and then testing for those things and getting rid of the CV.
I think that's universal. Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for joining us. We'll come back and answer all the questions as well. And and until next time, take care.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.